everybody. Welcome to the Young Turks. I'm Anna Kasparian, Jobrani, and Adrienne Lawrence join me today on this awesome panel. Cenk will be back tomorrow, but today we're gonna have a great show. We will have a completely different panel for the second hour. Brooke Thomas will be joining in, and we have, I'm honestly, I'm really looking forward to the first hour, don't get me wrong. Lots of serious stuff to get to, but in the second hour, there's a lot of dunking going on. And I'm in a dunking kind of mood, so I'm looking forward to that.
All right.
But we're gonna talk about how Mike Pompeo is gonna destroy the environment because he's an idiot. And then later on, we're going to discuss, militias, talking about rounding people up and murdering them.
Yep.
That sounds about right. Yeah, that's the world we're living in.
That would be it.
It's super unfortunate, but how are you guys doing?
Pretty good. It doesn't feel like Tuesday.
Yeah.
It's really weird.
What does it feel like?
I kind of feels like a Thursday.
I wish I could agree with you.
It's been a lot already.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Kind of a week?
Yes.
Yeah, well.
All right, well, I'm sorry for that downer in the very beginning. But
I feel good, even though the environment, according to all these news pieces, the environment's collapsing. But overall, feels like a Wednesday. Can we agree it's a Wednesday between Tuesday and
Thursday? It's a Wednesday afternoon.
All right.
We'll go with a Wednesday.
I like the compromise.
That's what I'm here for.
I like it. All right, well, let's get started. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo actually believes that melting ice caused by climate change is a wonderful thing because it opens up new business opportunities. This is what he said during his appearance at the Arctic Council in Finland.
The Arctic is at the forefront of opportunity and abundance. It houses 13% of the world's undiscovered oil, 30% of its undiscovered gas, and an abundance of uranium, rare earth minerals, gold, diamonds, and millions of square miles of untapped resources. Fisheries galore. And its centerpiece, the Arctic Ocean, is rapidly taking on new strategic significance. Offshore resources, which are helping their respective coastal states, are the subject of renewed competition. Steady reductions in sea ice are opening new passageways and new opportunities for trade. This could potentially slash the time it takes to travel between Asia and the West by as much as 20 days. Arctic sea lanes could come the 21st century Suez and Panama canals.
So as I had mentioned, this is the Arctic Council. It is a meeting of various nations in Finland to talk about various issues, including the fact that there are 4 million people living in the Arctic whose lives where they live is in danger. And so there was maybe some consideration about discussing climate change, but the United States was the only country that refused to even mention climate change. In fact, it appears that the Trump administration, on one hand, keeps referring to climate change as a Chinese hoax, and then on the other hand, admits that climate change is happening, but thinks that it's a great thing because it opens up new business opportunities, according to Pompeo. And he was also quoted as saying, "This is America's moment to stand up as an Arctic nation." The region has become an arena of global power and competition. So who cares what we're doing to that habitat? Who cares what we're doing to the environment? Who cares what type of ramifications future generations, this current generation has to deal with? People are gonna make money off of this, so awesome. That is essentially what Pompeo is saying.
There's a few things on this. First of all, as a bald person, I try to look at I try to look on the bright side, and when you lose your hair, I said at least I'm aerodynamic, right? So it feels like he's looking at the bright side. He's like, hey, at least things, boats are gonna be going faster now that there won't be any ice to slow them down. So that's number one. Number two, if this was written, it wasn't going off the cuff. Am I correct?
It seems as though he's reading a prompter. Yes.
Yeah, because like when Trump goes off the cuff, you go, he's just going off the cuff. This guy wrote this, so somebody proofread this and said, let's go with this whole. The melting of the ice caps is good because boats will go faster.
Yeah.
And number three, I had to look up Pompeo again about where he went to school. He went to Harvard, and so this looks bad for Harvard. This just because you go to Harvard doesn't make you smart. And by the way, you remember when Trump said that thing at the United Nations? I forget what he said, but everybody laughed. Remember he said something and he was trying to be serious, but they laughed at him?
I do remember
Yes.
that. I don't remember what he said.
I would have loved to see the camera angle on the Europeans and the Finnish people there watching him going, is this guy really saying what he is saying? These Americans are really stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And something also kind of that hits me, maybe I guess I should say, as a woman with a weave, I can tell you that, change, it happens and it's a good thing. But unfortunately, in this situation, it's not good at all. The world population has doubled in size over the last 50 years. And there are so many other mouths to feed, as well as people who are taking advantage of resources and need resources and food and everything that goes with that. And the fact that we're not using sustainable resources and energy, and we're not moving in a direction that will continue to allow this earth to sustain us in our growing numbers, it's just, the greed is just, it's intolerable. It's disgusting.
It is also fascinating how, on one hand, you have the US government that consistently judges the inner workings of other governments, of other sovereign countries. So for instance, Lula da Silva in Brazil is a political prisoner. He was accused of corruption, and there was really no evidence of that corruption other than one individual who was willing to testify against him in return for a plea deal. Now I bring that up because you'll have the US political establishment arguing, well, that corruption, I mean, we can't support Lula da Silva. I mean, that corruption is hideous. But what you're seeing right now is Mike Pompeo displaying for the world the type of corruption that we have in the United States, like to the point where he is willing to push the entire world to complete doom just so US business interests or multinational corporations can profit off of it. And it's absolutely disgusting. We have no leg to stand on to judge other countries. We have no leg to stand on to judge Venezuela. And yes, there are issues in Venezuela, but we have issues at home that we need to deal with. We have absolutely no right to judge or take this self-righteous position on any other country.
And by the way, he's touting the benefits of less ice so that boats can go faster. I feel, correct me if I'm wrong, as we progress, perhaps there's going to be ways to transport things not through water, maybe in the air. I mean, I think we have airplanes now.
Yes.
So I'm just saying, it's really looking at, I don't know what the job was for the speechwriter. It really was like, hey man, the globe is warming up and the world is about to be destroyed and melted. Find me some good things. What are some other good things?
Positive spin. It's
It
positive
was
spin.
complete and total positive spin. And I love how they'll do this when it serves their purpose in terms of getting money, but then they do this fear mongering otherwise when it helps further ethnocentric racism and bigotry. And something else, like you had pointed out, in terms of being in the air and using that as a way to maybe ship resources and goods and whatnot. The thing is now, because we have climate change, it also means that there's greater turbulence going on in the sky. As a result, planes are less stable, and so it's just more problematic, whether it's by water, land, or air. It's just, it's not a win.
I think the reality of the situation is if the average person is harmed by what's going on with the environment, then nothing changes. Or at least it's not enough to convince the people in positions of power to do something about that. And I'm specifically talking about the United States because there are world leaders who want to do something about this. I mean, part of the reason why all of these countries got together at this event in Finland was to talk about what we can do to combat climate change. And that included Canada, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Russia, Sweden. And the United States is, it appears, the only country that just refuses to even use the phrase climate change. And I also want to quickly read you a different statement that Pompeo made at this gathering. He said, quote, "I'm sure it was a good party," referring to the Paris Climate Accord.
Yeah.
"I'm sure it felt good to sign the agreement. But at the end of the day, what matters to human health, what matters to citizens of the world is that we actually have an impact on improving health, and our technology, our innovation, and R&D, meaning research and development, we put in the United States. That's what will drive better climatic outcomes. That's what will create cleaner air, safer drinking water, and that's what I hope the whole world will focus on." As if he cares at all about cleaner air. Again, he's deferring to business interests, right? When he says innovation, he's referring to business interests. We all know that.
And I love that statement about cleaner air and water. In part, it's like, how's Detroit doing? And let's talk about Puerto Rico. How's that running? So it's kind of like, do you really care? Or do you just want to, I don't know, maybe get some more money?
Yeah, you know, this whole thing of climate deniers, I read a great op-ed piece written by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Yeah.
And he was talking about the lack of emphasis we put on scientists and intellectuals, and how much emphasis we put on athletes.
Okay.
And he was talking about how that then leads to this world we live in where people go, I'm not gonna listen to the expert, I'm gonna go on my gut. So I'm not talking about Pompeo, who obviously knows that this is bad stuff that he's saying, but he's protecting those interests. But the people that then support him and go, this is a hoax, the climate change is a hoax, because my gut tells me it's a hoax. And why was there cold weather on the East Coast? The difference between weather and climate and all that stuff. This type of stuff allows people to believe in their guts and not in research. And I mean, it's frustrating where people that support somebody like a Mike Pompeo on something like this.
I think it's the failure of it's a failure of the education system. And I don't mean that to just simply criticize public education. I mean that because education has been effectively dismantled and defunded. And so critical thinking is not a thing anymore because the resources for quality education have been stripped away. There's also the issue of the media and the way that they have equivocated this very serious problem, and they act as if climate deniers are on the same ground as climate scientists, and that is just not the case. So that misinformation and that lack of critical thinking has really seeped into the minds of some Americans, certainly not all. And remember, in order to do something about climate change, all of us have to do things that are inconvenient, which of course I'm willing to do, but a lot of people don't want to have to make those changes. And I think it's a very convenient excuse to defer to the climate deniers and the so-called Chinese hoax to keep perpetuating this dangerous cycle that we're in.
By the way, did you notice he worked in fisheries galore? Whenever I hear galore, I think of the Eazy-E song. My name's Eazy, I got fisheries galore. You may have a lot of fisheries, I got much more. You know what I'm saying?
Coming in with that leather jacket.
I'm just saying.
Yes.
I'm into it.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about some of the chaos within Trump's administration, because there's more of it.
Yeah, for real.
Really?
Of course. Agriculture economists within Trump's administration are apparently undergoing a mass exodus. And part of the reason why is because many of them have been retaliated against by Trump administration officials for putting out accurate research in regard to Trump's trade war. Now, some of this research has to do with how the trade war has negatively impacted farmers. And we're not talking about big time industry farmers. We're talking about small town rural farmers who have been hurt tremendously by these policies. And the whole point of these economists is to draw attention to the negative effects so the administration can kind of recalibrate as it moves forward. But of course, the Trump administration has no interest in that. So according to Politico, Economic Research Service researchers, these are the agricultural economists I was referring to, presented a paper at an economic conference in early 2018 that indicated the GOP tax overhaul could largely benefit the wealthiest farmers, generating negative press coverage that staff members said irked senior officials at the USDA. So the reports also highlight the continued decline under Trump's watch in farm income, which has dropped about 50% since 2013. So if you look at the data and graphs related to this story, you'll see that as soon as the trade war started, there was more of a drop off in terms of the farmer's income. Now, being a small-time farmer in America is already an incredibly difficult job, and there have been years in the past where they bring in negative income as a result of weather conditions and situations like that. But the situation has been exacerbated by Trump's policies, and again, the whole point of these economists was to draw attention to it, and apparently they've been retaliated against. So in August, Sonny Perdue stunned members of the roughly 300-member research service by announcing plans to bring ERS, that's the Economic Research Service, under the control of the USDA's chief economist, who reports more directly to the secretary, meaning Perdue. Equally significant, he said the USDA would move the agency out of Washington to a location closer to the US heartland. So think about what that does to some of the employees or some of the researchers. If you have to uproot your life and move to the middle of the country, you might consider taking another job. And it appears that is the intention of moving them out of DC and into some other state.
Yep, no, because definitely moving out of DC and going somewhere else that's maybe more rural or whatnot, that's a huge lifestyle change. But as you mentioned, Anna, you know, the purpose is to not be able to keep them around so that then you can stack the deck with a bunch of researchers and economists who will say anything you want them to say, much like someone's doctor does.
I like how they just call it the heartland. Like, where are we going? Like, I mean, you can't be like, we're gonna move you to the heartland. I'm like, well, is that Nebraska or is that Illinois? Where am I going?
Right.
You know, and like you said, yeah, I mean,
these are people with families, and it's not easy to make that type of move, and it appears the administration knows that, and it's intentionally doing this to encourage people to quit. And just to give you some numbers, so far in fiscal year 2019, non-retirement departures from the agency have more than doubled on an annualized basis compared to the previous 3-year average. So people are quitting, and they're also noticing the type of treatment and the way that they're being talked to by administration officials, and they very much think that this is in regard to research that the administration just doesn't like. Because remember, Trump has a lot of support from those small town farmers, and putting out data that further confirms that Trump's policies are harming them could really hurt his chances at re-election.
Yeah, my question is, what is it going to take? I mean, I also heard today on the news this guy talking about how all these tariffs, and then his threatening of further tariffs. I mean, the market is taking a hit today. So this dude's just up there, just throwing stuff around like it's no big deal. And at what point does somebody sit there and go, "Wow, this guy really doesn't know what he's talking about"? Because he is not he's not as smart as he says he is, and he's not. I mean, you can tell by looking at him,
right?
But
the face alone,
is not a smart face. It just isn't. And but beyond that, what's it going to take for these people to go, okay, you know what, man, this guy is just, he's not. We don't have. It goes back to I did this joke in my special where I said a lot of people go, I want someone who is not. You know, people go, I want an outsider.
Right.
I want an outsider. I want someone who doesn't know how to do this. And we got one. We got one who really doesn't know. So he just throws around things, and now he's affecting these farmers. And then they give you research again. Research is a bad word to this administration, right?
It is. I mean, he lacks nuance, and it's fascinating because I think there is a debate to be had about the value of free trade, because I think in some cases free trade is harmful to US workers or laborers in other countries. And so again, it's a nuanced discussion that you have to really sit down and be willing to listen to the experts on, and Trump is unwilling to do that. He's much more interested in his executive time, where he sits down and wherever he does, and where he gets to watch Fox News for hours at a time. But this issue impacts the livelihood of so many people. And the reason why Trump's policies have actually benefited these factory farms and these, big industry farmers is because of the tax cuts. Yeah. Remember, they're raking in a considerable amount of money, and those tax cuts help them, but they don't help the farmers that are struggling, the farmers in the rural areas of America who haven't gotten any help from his policies whatsoever. So it's just something to keep in mind. One other thing I wanted to mention, though, is that Perdue and Trump made clear in their budget request in March that they wanted to reduce the scope of these agriculture economists, eliminating, quote, low priority research into such politically sensitive areas as food stamps and environmental issues. And I know that the welfare state is something that the right wing pretends is angry about. But the reality is that the welfare state is also what right-wing America benefits the most from.
That's right.
And the numbers bear that out. And I'm not saying that to judge them. I'm saying that because it's time to take a deep breath, take a step back, and consider how these policies are affecting average Americans. They're definitely beneficial for big corporations, but not for farmers who are already struggling.
No, and just to kind of bring up the real impact, I guess, at the lower level, they say that mid-sized farms, that's those with annual sales between $50,000 and up to $5 million, that they're dwindling to the point where they're selling off their machinery. And these auction houses, they've showed a 30% increase in people just selling their tractors, all of their farm equipment, because they're not being able to make money. The low prices for corn and soybeans, like that impacts a lot of people's income. And the fact is that these major corporations and these big entities that may own the property, they're still charging rent just as high, even though these farmers aren't making money. So people are actually leaving the business in its entirety. And essentially, the only person who really benefits are the large companies and the small niche farmers.
Yeah.
But otherwise, middle America, they're just dwindling away.
We got to take a break. When we come back, TYT Investigates broke an insane story involving that militia at the border and the violence that some of them are completely okay with. Come right back. You don't want to miss that.
We hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you want to get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment.
All right, DJ Bart Kyle on the ones and twos with all the funky hits.
It's a disco,
It was a
TYT disco.
Yes. Did you ever go to a disco, Maz Jobrani?
Did I go? I went to clubs. I don't know if they were still called discos back then. I'm 47.
The reason why, were you born in Iran?
I was born in Iran.
You definitely went to discos.
No, I didn't. Not in Iran. I was 6 years old when I left. I wasn't a 6-year-old.
Oh, I didn't realize you were. Because I asked Cenk once, did you ever go to discos in Turkey? And he said yes.
Oh, we had discos.
Yeah.
And I heard a lot of music. Do you guys know Boney M? Do you know who that is?
Of course I do.
Yeah.
Daddy cool.
Daddy cool, daddy cool.
So
Come on.
So
Come
good.
on.
So
How about
good.
Ma Becker? Da 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 da. You know Ma Becker?
Yes, of course.
She
They
was
played it
a
at every
mean
Armenian
scat.
wedding.
Yeah. Yes. So Iranians too.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah. So we had that.
All right. Well, let me tell you about Squarespace. Squarespace is great because it will help you build your website. It's affordable, it's easy to understand, and more importantly, they have a variety of templates, right? So for people like me who don't understand like graphics and how to make things look aesthetically pleasing online, Squarespace comes to the rescue every time. And the great news is, if you go to squarespace.com/TYT, you get a 10% discount, and it's awesome. So check it out. A few TYT lives and member comments before we get to our next story. Pork Chop Express writes in and says they don't care because they figure they'll be dead before anything happens, meaning the Pompeos of the world who just completely ignore the negative impact of climate change. They don't even care about their own family's future. Money is the only thing they have attachment to. Cozyaholic says, can we all agree that Pompeo is Chris Christie 2.0? He is a gross Trump lackey that wanted to be president. We can agree, definitely.
Sure.
TYT Lives, Cabbage says, I wonder what Pompeo's mom paid to get him into Harvard.
Ooh, I was thinking the same thing.
Yes.
And Hindu Hillbilly says, avoiding policy is all about avoiding promises that would not be pleasing to their donors. And I believe Gabby Marita mentioned that Bernie Sanders is proposing legislation that would specifically help some of the rural farmers and people living in rural America. Yeah. So there's actual policy where he wants to help people, whereas you have the Trump administration and Pompeo doing anything and everything to help big business to the detriment of small town farmers.
Tax breaks. They go, tax breaks for the rich will work its way down, and they're not going to go buy boats. They're going to give it to us. I don't believe it.
Yeah.
Terrible. All right, well, let's move on to TYT Investigates. Ken Klippenstein at TYT Investigates uncovered an insane story involving a former anti-immigrant militia leader who went to police and reported a militia individual, a member of that militia, who had said some pretty terrible things. So apparently this guy wanted to know, why are we just apprehending them? Okay, these are immigrants that they're apprehending at the border. Why are we just apprehending them and not lining them up and shooting them? We have to go back to Hitler days and put them all in a gas chamber. So Armando Gonzalez allegedly said that, and this is according to a police report that Ken Klippenstein received through a Freedom of Information Act request. And I mean, the fact that Stephen Brandt, the former militia member, felt that this was problematic enough to go to the cops really says something, because understand that Stephen Brandt is not one of these good guys. He was a very willing and active member of that militia, and he does believe that the militia should have the ability to apprehend migrants at the border, even though that's a federal crime, because they're not Border Patrol. They don't have the right to do that. But he thinks, okay, well, maybe this goes a little bit too far. Maybe we should do something about it. Armando Delgado Gonzalez then handed Stephen Brandt a handgun and ran to his vehicle and grabbed an AR-15. So he was willing to take action, and at that point, Brandt went and spoke to the authorities about it.
The fact that there's a guy named Armando Delgado Gonzalez saying all this.
I thought the same damn thing.
I mean,
I was just like, okay, son.
Was he dropped on his head? Like, what is wrong with this guy?
He says he's a veteran who suffers from PTSD, and he definitely seems to be, there's something completely and totally wrong here. And I can, well, from a legal standpoint, I can see why he went to the authorities, essentially because if he's involved with this Gonzalez guy, Brandt would be possibly linked in by way of a conspiracy. And so anything that Gonzalez went off and did as a result of that, without Brandt saying something, could actually be attributed to him, and then it becomes liable. So it was very smart of him, if he didn't even do it out of the goodness of his heart, to tell police so that he can say, hey, I'm not down for this.
I mean, I've never lived on the border, but I feel like there's way too many.
I don't know if you know that. I mean, yeah, you're not like in San Diego.
I'm not in San Diego, live on the border, but also I don't think I would ever take up arms. I mean, I would call the cops if something were happening, but I can't imagine. I mean, these guys.
No, but all those women and children are super dangerous. In fact, we've talked about this militia before. They're known as the United Constitutional Patriots, even though they're breaking the law and posing as Border Patrol, which they're not supposed to be.
Whenever they have too many like patriotic names, they're bad news. United Constitutional Patriotic of the presidential liberty, freedom fighting. Yeah, these guys are bad news.
Definitely, like. Focus on the family, one of those
focus on the family, right? That means we're gonna tell you what to do with your body. We're gonna focus on the family. We're gonna focus on your family.
Yeah, exactly. Not my own.
So when we had originally covered this militia and what they were doing, we showed a photo of them apprehending over 200 migrants, many of whom were women and children. I want to toss that video as B-roll. We'll talk over it because I want to give you more information and more details on what's going on. Now, the Border Patrol was asked to comment on this story, and they allege that they did not cooperate with this militia, that they don't agree with what the militia is doing because it is a federal crime. You are not allowed to pose as a police officer, as a Border Patrol agent. You get the picture. But there is evidence showing that there were Border Patrol agents cooperating and coordinating with this militia. That's right. It's unlikely that any of those Border Patrol agents will ever be held to account for what they did, but there is some good news, and that good news has to do with the militia leader who did get arrested following this story breaking. So let's take a quick look at that.
This country was built on three things: God, guns, and guts.
Hopkins leads a militia group known as the United Constitutional Patriots.
It is an invasion.
Based in Sunland Park, New Mexico, the militia members dress up in camouflage and are armed as they patrol the border looking for migrants who crossed over from Mexico. They are known to wear their own badges.
Alto, siete, Border Patrol.
And impersonate Border Patrol agents.
I am confident that Mr. Hopkins will be through this. He'll fare well. The AG has declared war on American citizens at the order of the ACLU.
What?
The AG, anyway. the Attorney General, he said, has declared who?
I don't think he knows what he's
William
talking
Barr?
About. I don't know.
Jeff Sessions?
Who is he talking?
Jeff Sessions was the one. I mean, if he was referring to Jeff Sessions, which I don't know I don't think he knows what he's referring to at all. But if he were referring to Jeff Sessions, he's the one who pushed to separate children from their parents at the border.
I see these guys and I think we have way too many Rambo type movies.
100%.
We just way too many, because these guys are watching that going like, oh, that's a good idea. I'm gonna dress up in the camouflage and go do my thing on the woods and get some of them cars, get some of them caravans.
You know they got those badges at Party City, right? You know they did those
Come
badges.
on, man.
Yes, they
we don't need
did.
no sticking badges.
Yes.
You know?
I don't think we have too many Rambo-style movies. I think that we have too many, ironically, older Americans, like some of the people that you saw in that video, who have absolutely no self-awareness.
Yeah,
right?
but
they think they're Rambo.
That's what I'm saying.
Like, they haven't looked in the mirror. Like, someone needs to sit them down and have a good conversation with them and tell them what they are, who they are, and how they're not Rambo.
Yeah, first of all, get in shape. You're not in shape. You gotta exercise. Rambo was fit. He took his shirt off. He looked good. You gotta look good.
I'm sure they'll blame that on immigrants too.
No, but
of course.
I'm telling you, that's the problem. Is
Immigrants ruin your metabolism. Happens to me all the time.
Burritos. They bring their burritos.
Well, to be
and make
fair,
us
that
fat.
has ruined my.
He goes. This country was built on gods, guns, and guts. That's what we stand for.
It is funny that a group that brands itself constitutional patriots doesn't really know what the country was founded on.
Oh, hell no.
But anyway, that's par for the course for these right wingers.
But as you said, they're grown men. It's like you're not a 10-year-old playing, whatever. We shouldn't be playing. I'm saying like playing like, good cop, bad cop, whatever that is, whatever the kids play, chasing each other. You're a grown man. All right, like don't you have a job?
That's what I was thinking. Don't you have something better to do?
Yeah.
Nope. And exactly. Apparently, they do not have anything better to do. And the fact that they even spend their nights this way.
Can you imagine if somebody calls you up and is like, "Look, we're rounding up a militia. You want to join?" I'd be like, "Yo, I
Get
can't.
the fuck out of here.
I got yoga at 10, and then I'm in the car. I got to go Pete's.
I think
got
that's
things
a
to do.
secret. More
Yeah.
yoga for everyone, and I think
yoga.
we'll calm those nerves, we'll ease those nerves. One serious point that I want to make though is, just going back to what Delgado said in regard to migrants, where he thinks that it makes sense to round them up, put them in gas chambers, shoot them. Oftentimes, when I see debates about the impact that Trump has had, I just don't understand those who think that, no, Trump's not that bad. The media it's just hyperbole from the media. It's not hyperbole. What he has done has emboldened the worst parts of our society, and they are taking action. They're advocating for violence. They're inciting violence in a lot of cases. And you're seeing more and more people, like the woman that you're about to see, who was at one of these Steve Bannon events that he was doing. Take a look.
I just want to say this.
Yes, ma'am.
Never in my life did I think I would like to see a dictator. But if there's going to be one, I want it to be Trump.
Bannon stood up.
Wow.
Who is that whack job?
She's just some woman who supports Trump, and she said, never in my life did I think I would want a dictator, but if there were ever to be a dictator, I want it to be Trump.
Oh, jeez.
Well, she got her wish. She's working on it.
Yeah, for
Definitely.
real.
What you just said, I have always said this too. I mean, he doesn't take responsibility for his words, and he needs to take responsibility for his words because you're at the highest position, and you have a lot of visibility.
Yes.
Now the problem I heard this great piece where they were talking about, these extremists on, whether it's the right-wing militia members or people joining terrorist organizations, whatever. These guys have always existed. It's just that disseminating the ideas was a lot harder. You had to go out and make flyers and see if people wanted to join your group or send out letters. Now it's all online, so it's not just Trump. There's a lot of people disseminating these ideas, but then when they see somebody in a position of power talking like this, I agree with you. It emboldens them, and they go, "Let me throw in the word Hitler, gas chambers." That's totally accepted, right? I could say that in public to you. Anybody?
Yeah, exactly. Final point. The internet has certainly mobilized people and it's connected them, but they were still kind of lurking in the shadows because it wasn't socially acceptable to come out and reveal to the world that you think it's okay to round people up and put them in gas chambers. But someone like Trump has made them think, oh, it's totally acceptable. In fact, Trump is able to say all the things that he says about various groups of people, and he's the president of the United States. So if he can do it, why can't I? And again, the fish rots from the head down, and Trump is as rotten as they come, especially when it comes to rhetoric and the way that he talks about migrants, the way that he talks about people of color, the way that he talks about Muslims, it has an impact and it has an effect, and we're seeing it today. So let's take a break. When we come back, we have more news for you. Use the hashtag TYT Live to tweet to us during the break. One of the stories that we will get to is in regard to the NRA president. They have a new president, and she wants to minimize a congresswoman's win. She was newly elected. I'll tell you how she's doing it and the backlash when we return.